So today we're going to be looking at how some Texas Democrats fled the state to prevent voting on a bill on voting rights. Doing so, we'll look at this Fox News article and looking at the issue generally beyond that. Of course, we'll be using all the tools at our disposal, including the 5-sheet. And starting out, though, we'll look at the 6-shape just to get an idea of what this article has in it. Compared to a lot of what we're reading, this one's not that bad. Now, it is fairly high on the opinion angle, and in terms of relevancy, it's fairly low importance to a lot of voters. I mark that not because this issue, either the voting bill or the fact that the state legislators fled the state, both of those are fairly important, but what they're framing it as, it's about how this photo of drying clothes and phony sacrifice, the take Fox News has on it is almost gossipy. It's, they're not focusing on the substance of the issue. So they get pretty high on the irrelevancy thing. And the unknowability thing, they get a little tick there. Because it's kind of there's no way to prove right or wrong. It's, again, such a non-issue. You can't really prove who's the winner here. But beyond that, not much emotionality. All the sources are named and quoted, and it's pretty clear what they're saying. So, pretty straightforward article, all things considered. So, let's look at their headline as they write it. Texas Democrats' photo of drying clothes leads to new accusations of phony sacrifice. And then, what is that? Is that a fact or opinion? I said that's a fact. It's pretty straightforward. Because Fox is not saying that these articles are, or that this photo is evidence of phony sacrifice. They're saying that it has led to new accusations of phony sacrifice. So all they're saying is that people are making these accusations. That is just a factual statement. They're not opining, at least in this headline, as to whether or not those are valid accusations. So I think that's a factual headline. Paraphrasing it, not going to change much because it's a factual headline. What's the bias of this? Fox News establishment right, mainstream corporatist type of right wing. And on this particular issue, Fox is generally giving lukewarm approval to these state voter integrity laws. They're on the side of states like Texas and Florida that are passing these laws, but they're not all about it. They're not pushing it too hard. They're kind of straddling the fence, but they're leaning in favor of the state legislatures passing those laws. Alright, and then the thesis, I said, was an opinion. And this one, you could argue that it's a factual thesis, but I think when you read it in the context of the full article, it is an opinion. So it all comes from this paragraph right here. Critics suggested that post was another self-serving attempt by a Democrat to portray their absence from Texas after taking a chartered flight to the nation's capital as a personal sacrifice instead of a political strategy move. So if you read that paragraph in isolation, it sounds very similar to the title, where they're just reciting what the critics said. So again, that would be a factual assertion. But when you read it in the context of the whole article, the way I paraphrased it, critics rightly suggested. Because Fox seems to be agreeing with those critics, the way they're framing everything, the evidence they're selecting to include in this article. So I said it was an opinion because that's the point they're trying to prove that those critics are correct in their assertion. So what evidence did they have? A couple of points I listed down here. They mentioned that so really quick, this is the meat of the article. It's just this one tweet by a Texas state legislator saying, "You bet we're recognizing and honoring our country's heritage. As most Texans, though, this is what we're doing tonight, using whatever's accessible, washing our clothes in the sink." And then has a picture of, like, hanging her clothes up to dry. So, what, Fox is saying, or, Fox is maybe just reciting the critics saying, is that this is a faux martyrdom. Like, oh my god, I had to flee the state to protect democracy. Look at what terrible, I have to wash my clothes in the sink now and hang them up. But one of the points they raise, which I think is a fair point, is they could have just washed those clothes. Whatever hotel she's at probably has, like, washing machines. Or she could have just gone to a laundromat somewhere. You don't have to, like, hand wash your clothes if you're not in your home state. That's not a law or something. So this was obviously done for dramatic effect to, like, hang them up in such a visual manner. So that seems like a pretty fair point. Also, Fox included this quote from Texas Governor Abbott, saying the legislators were hanging out on a taxpayer-paid junket. Alright, so the name manipulation tactics in this one, again, if we go through and look at what these are, this is usually the heart of a 5-sheet, is finding these are the most common tricks that these news liars will use to push their agenda. In this particular one, it's blank, because I did not see any of these particular lies in this story. Because this, a little bit more straightforward than most of the articles we dissect here. So, name manipulation tactics blank. Now, we're going to move on to the final section. And what are the big picture notes? First of all, they didn't discuss the actual details of the bill, which I thought was an interesting omission. And again, I think that ties into the fact that Fox gives lukewarm approval to these at best, right? Fox is focusing on things like this, on these personal, almost gossipy takes on, oh, what a fun sightseeing trip for you guys. And they're referencing this. This is a different state legislator. This is basically the same story, but this one went more viral, from the 13th, from 3 days ago. My first meal as a fugitive. Same basic thing. After he left the state, he posted that, and I think that got ratioed on Twitter. Or, it looks like more likes than comments. But there were a lot of people reacting negatively to that. So, you would think if Fox was really all in on defending this voter rights bill, or voter integrity bill, however you want to define it, they would talk about the actual contents of it. So let's take a quick look at that. This is a CNN article giving us a brief overview. So I doubt this is holistic, and honestly, I doubt it's a fair representation. But I chose one coming from CNN, especially with this headline, "What's in the restrictive voting bills being pushed, blah, blah, blah." I chose one which is going to skew the interpretation to make this bill look as bad as possible, as undemocratic, as restrictive as possible. So what are they saying is in it? Because that's something you don't see that much. Alright. partisan poll watcher protection. What's wrong with that? So, if you remember, that was one of the big arguments in the 2020 election, was that the poll watchers were unfairly kicked out of some of these contentious counties, some of these contentious polling places when the ballots were being counted, where specifically the Republican poll watchers were kicked out, and then the votes continued to be counted in their absence. And as the allegations go, that's around the time when the numbers shifted dramatically from Trump being in the lead, and then overnight they shifted. Now all of a sudden Biden's ahead. So having partisan poll watchers is part of the argument, whether or not they should be there. Now, what do these guys do? They don't actually vote, count the ballots themselves. They're just there to observe and, take notes, make challenges if they see something improper. Because think about it this way. Would the Democrats be comfortable if a particular municipality, a particular jurisdiction was run entirely by Republicans? They collected all the ballots, they counted all the ballots, they tabulated all the results, and did not allow a single Democrat in the room for that whole process. Would people be confident that was a free and fair process? I believe most would not. That's why we rely on nonpartisan, poll workers or election officials, whatever the official term is there. But in reality, lots of times, those people are more partisan than we'd like them to be. So the safeguard we have is that both parties are allowed to have partisan poll watchers in there who are not doing the actual work, but are observing and are just able to make challenges, take notes, record, that sort of stuff. And if in some of these states, these people were effectively kicked out and the voting continued. So all this is doing is making it harder to kick those people out. And I think if you really had a thorough discussion on that, it's not something many Americans would disagree with. What CNN says is arguing that it could lead to voter intimidation. But keep in mind, this is... whatever. That's a very nebulous argument, let's say. I haven't seen any good evidence of that. Just about everything could lead to voter intimidation, yeah. Having no poll watchers there could lead to... I'm going to limit what I'm saying because this video is hopefully going to be posted on YouTube and not deleted, but I think I've said enough on that. Alright, so then the mail-in ballot restrictions. So, this is like the voter ID laws, but you don't even need a voter ID. It's just saying if you're requesting a mail-in ballot, you either need to write down your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. So you don't even need to provide a voter ID. It's, who is not able to provide one of those two things? I suppose there's some small section of immigrants who wouldn't have a social security number yet and who are also unable to get a driver's license or a state ID somehow. But it is a very, very insignificant group that's affected there. Not very restricted at all. drive-through voting ban. So, whatever. I don't see that making a big difference. Restricting early voting hours. Maybe you could argue that makes it a little bit harder, but they still allow early voting statewide between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. So it's like, what? How restrictive is that? Alright, tracking software. Election officials, not even in all counties, but only large counties, are required to track certain activity on these voting machines via software. I don't see the problem with that. And they have a protocol for recording some of this. What is this? Is this for voting or is this for counting the votes? Whatever, it doesn't say. But there's a certain video recording and live streaming. And then finally, the ballot harvesting. So if you do 3 or more voters, you have to fill, if you are the one handing in the ballot, not for yourself, but for 3 or more voters, you have to fill out a form saying what your relationship is to those. You can't go to an old folks' home and come back with 100 votes that, you just happened to get signed because you were doing a good deed and just carrying these ballots back for these people who may or may not have the capacity to know what they were signing and may or may not be influenced by what you were telling them when they signed the thing. May or may not have even actually signed it. And then, there's this other House bill, very similar measures, slightly different. One of them makes the ballot harvesting a felony. So, this is the thing that's going to destroy democracy. All that stuff we just went through, that is like the worst spin on it. This is the CNN restrictive voting bill. Oh my god, they're going to destroy the country. Voting is our most sacred right because of all that stuff we just went through. That's a nothing burger. So, whatever. I just wanted to provide that context to the story to show what we're actually talking about here. And it also gives us a little insight to the fact that Fox is not providing that context. Instead, they're focusing on this tweet, and on this tweet, they're focusing on the aw snap side of it. Because they don't want to get themselves too deep, and they're not too committed to these voting bills. Okay, so the last thing we have today is the Straw Council. So remember, these are the 6 different voices which roughly approximate some of the main political attitudes in this country. And we're going to see how they might weigh in on the topic. Starting out with Mainstream Mitch, who's the establishment Republican, old school GOP corporatist, pro-war, wants to lower taxes, wants to invade every country. You know the guy. Alright, what would he say? These politicians should stop wasting everybody's time to make stars out of themselves and go and get home to do their jobs. Vote. Yeah. He's not going to say anything too divisive. He's going to do politician talk. He just wants them to go back and he's obviously not going to favor the Democrats, but he's not going to make too extreme a statement either way. He knows this is not a winning battle for them. It's more of a siege warfare that he's going, where these guys can't stay on the run forever. So he's not going to make he's not going to make a big deal out of this. He's just going to take the high ground and puff his chest out and act, oh, well, why aren't they voting? Just sort of bullshit, nonsensical politician talk. Alright, establishment woke. So, establishment woke, this is the corrupted mainstream woke, where, what is this? Young Turks would be a good example of this, where they say, we are the true champions of progressivism. That's why we need to do basically all the same stuff mainstream Mitch does, but we'll put a brown person in charge. Right? They're still totally pro-war, still pro-big business, but they'll just have different justifications for why they have to give Amazon all those tax breaks. Because of COVID or, whatever. They come up with different ways to get to the same end. These legislators are being heroic, and Fox is being problematic by targeting a woman and a man of color. So to go back, this Jean Wu is the one, and then Donna Howard, she's a woman. Targeting a woman and a man of color. Any restrictions on the sacred right to vote is unacceptable. Yeah, not willing to dive into the weeds exactly what the restrictions are. Just any quote-unquote restrictions are unacceptable. Alright, the heterodox. This guy, a little crackpotty, little bit, in today's climate, mostly aligns with the right, with a type who would have been more left-wing in the 60s, hippie-type era, where you might see him out in a cabin in the woods somewhere, very much distrustful of the government, centralized power. Alright, these power-hungry maniacs will do anything. It's no surprise that the lawmakers will break the law to allow for laws that allow for illegal voting. That, pretty straightforward take from that guy. Main Street Bob. This guy just wants to live his life. He's about as apolitical as you can be in 2021, but gets dragged in to politics inevitably, as just about everything does in this era. Geez, these restrictions don't seem all that bad. Can't the lawmakers just debate it out until they come to an agreement? Maybe a bit of a naive take. He's looking at it facially for what the laws are and how the process is supposed to work, and less as, a power struggle. Less reading between the lines. Okay, and then we got the Maganatic. This is, America First, pro-Trump guy. Hypocritical liberals. Every day we hear about how evil the filibuster is because it denies the majority the ability to pass laws. And now these liberal legislators are being praised for taking an even more extreme stance to deny the majority the ability to pass laws. So yeah, he's just taking the most partisan view possible on this. Not that he's necessarily wrong, but not necessarily productive either. Alright, the true blue Bernie bro. So this is a guy who believes what Bernie said, what Bernie campaigned on early in his campaign, before he endorsed Joe Biden. The, Medicare for all, $15 an hour, actual $1,400 checks, not the $600 plus $800 or whatever. The guy who's views himself as a real progressive. These people are doing the right thing, using every tool at their disposal to protect voting rights. If the National Democrats had any courage, they would follow suit and scrap the filibuster to pass H.R. 1. So he's not too hung up on formalities. He's just focused on getting it done by any means necessary. Alright, well, that's the end of the Straw Council. I think this is an interesting story, seeing how curious to see how Texas is going to handle this, if the governor actually arrests these people, like he says he's going to do. But, one way or another, I think we'll have a resolution to that. Actually, I was going to say I think we'll have a resolution to this fairly soon, but God only knows, man. What's stopping it from these guys staying in Washington, D.C. for another 6 months and just grinding the state of Texas to a halt? They won't be able to pass any laws for the next year. What's stopping them from doing that? I don't know. Maybe this could get interesting. I'm leaning towards the likelihood that at some point this is going to come to an end, that this bill will get passed, that this is just the people doing these tweets and stuff, that the Texas legislature doing this fleeing of the state is just trying to raise their own profile, and eventually they'll come back under protest and let the bill be passed and say, it's the worst thing ever, but we did everything we possibly could. But maybe not. Maybe they will take it to the next level and just, try to kill the functionality of the state of Texas. Try to just we'll see. This is going to get interesting. I'm leaning towards them letting the bill pass, but it is far from certain. Alright, guys, let me know what you think about this. I'm going to keep trying to tweak it, keep trying to update it, add new tools, make them more efficient as we go. But until next time, you have a great day.